I get asked quite frequently, hey, John, how's the housing market? And John, what are your thought predictions on the interest? So while people aren't in a panic, right, they're not throwing money around. They're being a bit more careful, including myself, right? This really matters in real estate as a complete whole unit. So that hesitation ripples across the housing market nationally. The people who prepare now will be the ones who win when the moment comes. What does this mean for real estate, right? It means that
Depot on the beat.
John Lee Real Estate.
So today we are doing a solo podcast, and we'll talk about where the economy really stands and what's happening with jobs, how interest rates are shifting, and what all this means if you're buying, selling, or investing in a property right now. And I'll also share what I'm seeing on the ground, how the big national headlines are translating into local markets, and what opportunities might be hiding in plain sight. So if you've been hearing mixed signals, you probably are, like whether rates are down, prices are stable, the market is cooling. It's not uncommon. Even if it's heating back up, I mean, I got you. I will explain everything, and we're going to unpack all this together piece by piece. So I'm going to use this solo podcast to segment some of your concerns for this year, for 2025. So sit back and we'll just kind of get into it. And the first section that I want to talk to you guys about is the big picture and where the economy stands right now. So for 2025, in this October of 2025, it's actually steady. It's not booming. It's not crashing. It's just steady. So right now, the GDP, which is what that means is it's the total value of everything produced in the country. That's what GDP is. It's growing up at about like 2% this year. And that's like, the best way to put it, that's like a car cruising in the middle lane, moving forward, but not really breaking any, record speeds. That's something for you guys to consider, because the GDP is a good way of evaluating the health of our country, and there is some level of growth there. The other thing to consider is inflation. So this is how fast prices rise, right? It's cooled to around 3%, down from what it used to be, which is 6 to 7%. So things like bread, milk, butter, sugar, I tell people often, they don't get any cheaper, right? So that is because of inflation, right? So prices aren't rising as fast anymore, but they're still high, and there's things to consider like groceries, insurance, utility bills, right? They've settled at a new quote unquote normal, right? That's actually more expensive than before, but just again, something for you guys to keep in mind with inflation and GDP. So what does this mean for real estate, right? It means that while people aren't in a panic, right, they do take a notice, right? They're not throwing money around. They're being a bit more careful, including myself, right? And homeowners are now holding on to their low mortgage rates, which is the term which I often coined several times, rate locking, right? So homeowners are holding on to their lower mortgage rates, and buyers are now watching affordability. And investors, well, they're really analyzing deal with a bit more precision. And the Federal Reserve, which is the big player behind interest rates, people often look at the Federal Reserve to see where the interest rates are going to end up going. It's noticeably slowed down. So that's why in September, they trimmed the federal fund rate from like 4.5% down to 4.25. So that's a bit of a trim there. So that move is giving the economy a little bit of a nudge, making borrowing slightly cheaper to encourage spending and also investing. So the big takeaway here, to summarize all of that, is that the economy is generally pretty stable. Inflation is cooling, and the rates are starting to ease up a bit, but the system's still a bit tight, and tight enough that people are a bit cautious. It's almost like their eyebrows are starting to raise a bit, right? And when people are also cautious, that's when strategies matter most in real estate. So we talked about GDP, we talked about inflation. The other thing that you want to talk about, just the general economy, is jobs, and that's the that's like the lifeblood of the market, right? So jobs are the engine that drives the whole entire real estate market. And right now, job growth is slowing down a bit. So the U.S. added roughly about like 20 something thousand dollars, 20 something, 20,000, roughly about 20,000 new jobs last month. And that sounds like a lot, but when you compare it to $150,000 per month that you saw last year, that's like a considerable drop. And there was a huge tech boom everywhere, right? All of that has considerably slowed down. So the unemployment rate is around 4.3%, still solid, but trending upward slightly. So to put things in perspective, when I first got my job, what's that, 2011, that was roughly hitting around 9 to 10%. So I was at like double, right? When I first got my job compared to where it is. So I'm just trying to put things in perspective for some of the people that might be millennials. Anyway, so what's interesting is where the jobs are, sectors like healthcare and government are still growing, right? But manufacturing, logistics, and retail, they're starting to pull back a bit. And some of that's because of tech, right? I just briefly mentioned that tech boom, right? And some because of also like slower consumer spending. People just aren't spending as much. And some are just due to seasonal adjustments. So this really matters in real estate as a complete whole unit because, well, especially for jobs, more specifically, because when jobs slow down, the confidence dips and the confidence drives buying decisions for real estate. So if you think your job is secure and you feel comfortable buying a house or upgrading, but if you think layoffs might be around the corner, even if they never, even if they never actually happen, that still is a reason for some of you to hold back, and psychologically you wait, right? So that hesitation ripples across the housing market nationally, right? So then now there's fewer buyers, longer days on market, and fewer bidding wars. So this could be a potential opportunity for buyers in this case. And suddenly we now shift from what we have been so accustomed to, which is a seller's market, to a balanced one, right? So let me be clear. We're not in a weak job market and we're not in a booming one, right? We're just in a phase of a balanced, it's pretty balanced right now. And nationally, it seems as if it's pretty balanced. So balanced markets actually create opportunity because there's stability. And because in balanced markets, the emotional buyers begin to disappear and the smart strategic ones, the investors and the long-term planners, they all start to step in. So if you're watching job trends in your area, pay attention to the industries that are expanding. So if you're in a market that has a strong employment in healthcare, education, or logistics, it's likely they'll stay resilient. If you're in a market where there's a huge tech boom, for example, let's just say Houston or some of these big cities in the South, well, that's a different story, right? So the other section outside of jobs are interest rates. So the real story behind the headlines for interest rates, I want to dig a little bit deep into this. This is a topic everyone's been talking about, and I get asked quite frequently, hey, John, how's the housing market? And John, what are your thought predictions on the interest? So as of October of 2025, of this recording, the average 30-year fixed mortgage is sitting around 6.25. Okay. So I actually just closed on my house a couple of weeks ago. And even just a couple of weeks ago, I locked in at like 6.875. Okay. So, I mean, rates, there's going to be opportunity regardless. So, that's actually 6.25 is a lot lower than earlier this year, as I kind of explained, which was at one point over 7%, but still higher than what people had used to get during the pandemic. And that's honestly where the big tension is. And millions of homeowners are locked in at ultra low rates, like stupid, ridiculous rates. And they brag about it, right? You hear it all the time. I got 2.5, I got 3, I got 3.5%. And they don't want to sell their house because moving means doubling their rate. And houses, since COVID, right, or before COVID, have considerably gotten expensive. So that's what we call, and I mentioned before, the rate lock effect, the lock-in effect, right? It's a huge reason inventory still remains tight. Now, what does a 1% rate drop really mean? So I'll break it down in numbers. On a $400,000 home, dropping from a 7% to a 6% cuts your monthly payment by about $260, almost $300 a year. And that's like $3,000 a year, right? So that's real money. And that's a difference, right? That can really determine whether a buyer can qualify or not. So when you're going from 7% to 3%, well, think about it. That's a huge difference. That's 3 times the amount. So even these small moves in interest rates have big ripple effects. And if the Fed continues easing through the next year, we could see rates dip into the mid fives by summer of 2026. Okay. My personal opinion, I think that's a very healthy market and a time to consider jumping in if that's what you truly want to do and you want to wait. But that could also unleash a new wave of buyers, especially those who've been sitting on the sidelines waiting for affordability to improve. So here's the key. The people who prepare now will be the ones who win when the moment comes. All right, I'm going to say it one more time. So the people who prepare now will be the ones who win when the moment comes. So if you're a buyer and you get your finances in order, you fix your credit, you understand your numbers, or if you're a seller, understand that pricing strategically today puts you ahead of the curve before the next shift. All right. So the other thing to consider is if you're an investor, this is the time to like really look for deals, right? Scout deals, because by the time everyone else wakes up, you're already in position and you already have a pipeline ready to go. The next section I want to talk about is where we are. I know we briefly touched on where we are with the rates, but where are we with the housing market today? So let's look directly at the housing market. So the national median home price right now sits around $363,000, right? So it's like in the mid threes, right? The national median price. So that's up slightly from last year, but the rate of growth has slowed down, right? It's gone up, but it's slowed down. So we're not seeing those double-digit appreciation numbers anymore. We're in a new normal where homes might go for 2 to 4% a year, depending on the market. So that is considered to be normal, guys. We're not hitting double digits, all right? So it's interesting too, because inventory is still tight. So as I mentioned to you about that rate lock, that's kind of what's causing this inventory to really be tight. So roughly 2 to 3 months of supply in many areas. And I want you to remember 6 months is considered to be balanced. So technically it's not a seller's market, but only just, if that makes any sense. So homes that are priced right, I should say, and show well are moving, and homes that are overpriced, outdated, or poorly presented, they're sitting. So buyers are being extremely selective, and they have the right to be, all right? Sellers, I want you to understand that buyers have the right to be selective right now because they're being patient, they're being more informed, and they're waiting. They're factoring other things like higher insurance costs, property taxes, and maintenance, right? On the other hand, sellers are now understanding this, right? And they have been they've been in far more negotiable than they have been in the years before, and we're seeing more credits for repairs, more willingness to cover closing costs, and more collaboration overall. Even inspections are starting to come back. Hooray, right? So it's changing a bit, guys, and it's not the frenzy of 2021, but it's also not the fear of 2008. It's somewhere in between, and it's honestly beautiful. It's a real market again. And I'll be honest, I love markets like this because skill matters, negotiation matters, local expertise matters, right? So again, for other agents out there, I mean, this is random, but other agents out there, investors, or even clients listening, this is kind of a market that separates the pros from the amateurs. And I think this is going to be more than ever a skill-based game currently in the current environment. So the thing to consider is, and the question that I get sometimes is, Why? Like, what's going on? Why do things feel stuck, right? Why does it feel like the market's moving in slow motion? And it kind of feels that way right now, right? It feels like nothing's really changing since the last time you and I had talked, whatever, right? It comes down to three big factors. We mentioned this before, right? The lock-in effect. As I mentioned earlier, millions of millions of homeowners have ultra low rates. Selling their home would mean buying another one at a double the cost of borrowing. So they're staying put and they're keeping inventory low. So how many examples do you have of maybe your parents, right? Or someone that's elderly that doesn't want to sell their house, even though it's so damn big? Because if they sell their house, the current mortgage that they're paying is going to end up being less than what their new house is going to be, right? That's just a prime example of what we're dealing with, guys. And I just want you to be realistic with what's happening, right? And being empathetic of this situation. Construction is slowing down. Builders are being a bit more cautious because material costs, labor shortages, and long permitting timelines, right? They make it harder to ramp up new housing. So new supply isn't keeping pace with demand. So that is another thing to consider. And the consumer psychology, right? So after years of up, down, up, down, up, down, of price spikes, inflation, and uncertainty, and people are tired, right? Many are playing defense instead of offense. But here's the thing, markets like this build the next wave of opportunity, all right? As an investor, I'll say this one more time. Markets like this build the next wave of opportunity because when people pull back, savvy investors and disciplined buyers step forward and they buy when things are quiet. And when the next upcycle hits, they're the ones sitting on equity gains and cash flow, okay? I can tell you right now, I own a property that I bought in 2018. It's probably balance on that right now is about 308. I can sell it right now without hesitation for at least 525. That is just a prime example, right? So if things feel stuck, understand that the calm is temporary, all right? The fundamentals are still strong. People need housing. Supply is limited and rates are easing, right? So it's only a matter of time before momentum starts to return again. So if you're looking ahead, here is what to expect, right? So what's next? So based on current trends, I see three main scenarios over the next 6 to 12 months. There's a soft landing. The economy keeps growing slowly. Inflation keeps cooling and the Fed keeps lowering rates gradually. So in this case, mortgage rates fall into the mid fives, buyer confidence improves, and we get a mild rebound in sales volume without like crazy price swings. Scenario two is there a stagnant cycle, right? So the economy stays flat, job growth stays flat, everything just generally stays flat, and we hover between 6 and 6.5% in rates. So here, housing stays balanced, not crashing, not booming, just steady with local opportunities depending on job growth. The third is the rebound year. So if job growth picks up faster than expected and the Feds cut rates more aggressively, if the Feds cut more rates, if the Feds cut rates more aggressively, we could see a burst of new demand by the mid 2026. That, again, that's just a different scenario, but that would bring more listings, faster transactions, and a more modest price growth. So my take, I believe we're going to be somewhere between the first and the second scenario right now, leaning more towards a soft landing. Nothing extreme, nothing catastrophic, just a normal market that rewards those who stay informed and move with intention. So what should you do right now? Okay. Let's end with some takeaways. So if you're a buyer, right, don't chase perfection because you want to focus on affordability, not timing. You want to buy when it makes sense for you, and you want to plan to refinance it later if the rates so happen to drop. Let's just be honest. You're not going to get 3%, right? If you want that 3%, 2%, something really bad has to happen, right? You have to keep in mind that COVID was bad. Like, people were dying during COVID. Okay, guys? People were dying and we thought the world was going to end. So that was a bad thing that happened, and that has to happen again in order for us to get like a rate like that, right? So if you're waiting around, it's important to be informed. And if you're a seller, presentation and pricing are going to end up being everything. So homes that are clean, homes that are renovated, homes that are well prepped and priced correctly will always move, even in cautious markets. And lastly, if you're an investor, this is the time to stay active and to run your numbers and analyze cash flow and buy the fundamentals and not hype. And for everyone, and just for everyone who is listening, remember this: real estate is never a sprint. It's always a marathon. And the people who win are the ones who stay consistent through every cycle, who keeps learning, who keeps the ones who keep buying and keep adapting. So we've seen high rates, we've seen some low ones, we've seen some booms, we've seen some busts, and everything in between. And through it all, real estate has remained one of the most reliable paths to wealth. So stay patient, stay focused, and play the long game. And if you would like to hear any more on this podcast, or if you feel like this is a really good share, please share it with your friends. And if you feel like there was any value at all, please feel free to subscribe. And if you have any questions, also feel free to direct message me directly. Thanks, guys.
John Lee Real Estate, find you the best rates all throughout Philly like Schuylkill Expressway. Talking to people who out of